Hi, I am Rick Bonney, Director Emeritus of the Public Engagement and Science Program at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. This presentation is part of a 10-module training program on developing and implementing citizen science projects for which scientists collaborate with members of the public to address real-world problems. The goal for this program is to introduce fundamental concepts of citizen science in U.S. federal land management agencies, which often use citizen science to manage resources and to engage the public in agency missions. This program was developed by several partners, including staff from the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park.
This is the third module in our 10-module series. Module 2 focused on determining whether citizen science is a good tool for your research or management needs. The goal of this presentation is to guide you in setting obtainable goals and measurable objectives for your project on parks, forests, grasslands, refuges, or similar lands and waters, and it fits within our 10-part series here. 3 takeaways for this module are: first, goals serve as guiding stars for your project. Second, objectives are actions taken to achieve your goals. And third, project models help you to conceive, plan, and carry out a successful project. Whether you are implementing an existing project, such as the Dragonfly Mercury project described in Presentation 2, or developing a brand new project to meet a specific need for research or management, clearly articulating project goals and objectives is important for 2 reasons. First, setting goals and determining associated objectives will help you to create a strong project plan. Second, you will measure the success of your project largely by determining whether and how you have achieved your objectives. Goals articulate what you want your project to accomplish. Citizen science practitioners tend to think of project goals in 3 main categories: goals for science, goals for management and policy, and goals for public science literacy. A project can meet goals in all 3 categories if it is carefully designed to do so. While goals should be visionary, they also should be realistic and relevant with regard to project scale, participant interests, and agency priorities. For citizen science projects, developing goals typically requires determining what data are required, who is likely to collect the data, who is likely to use the data, and what would constitute project success. For example, a national wildlife refuge might have a goal of improving habitat for wildlife. While a good goal for the refuge, it's too broad for a citizen science project. But if the refuge is suffering from an influx of invasive species that are impairing wildlife habitat, then a possible goal for a citizen science effort could be to document the presence and distribution of invasive plant species. Such information could be used to develop an invasive species management plan. Let's take a look at 3 different citizen science projects developed at or in partnership with a federal agency. First, the Flying Squirrel Project. Second, the Saguaro Census. And third, Colorado Bat Watch. The Flying Squirrel Project began in 2014 after the Center for Biological Diversity filed notice of intent to sue the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a claim that the San Bernardino flying squirrel should fall under the protection of the U.S. Endangered Species Act. At the time, data on the population and range of the species were insufficient to make a ruling under that act. The Fish and Wildlife Service established the Flying Squirrel Project to determine the squirrel's abundance, distribution, and habitat use. The Saguaro Census is led every 10 years by staff at Saguaro National Park to study the long-term health and vitality of the park's namesake cactus. Begun in 1990 and developed into a citizen science project in 2000, the census aims to understand the impact of environmental factors such as fire, drought, and climate change on saguaro health, distribution, and survival. It also aims to build greater public awareness of long-term ecological processes. Colorado Bat Watch was started to monitor Colorado bat populations in response to current and emerging threats, especially from white nose syndrome, which has killed millions of bats in the eastern and midwestern U.S. since 2006. Volunteers help to monitor roost sites, especially maternity roost sites, as a means of understanding impacts of white nose syndrome on local populations. The project is intended to provide reliable data to inform bat management efforts and to build public support for bat conservation. As each of these projects began, project developers determined their goals. For the Flying Squirrel Project, the goal was to determine the distribution and habitat use of the San Bernardino flying squirrel. The goal of the saguaro census is to study the long-term health and vitality of saguaro cactus throughout Saguaro National Park. And the goal of Colorado Bat Watch is to provide reliable data to meet multi-agency statewide bat monitoring needs. These goals clearly state what each project is intended to accomplish. As such, they serve as guiding stars. Goals help to keep a project on track and can be visited regularly to ensure that project resources are being used wisely. But as important as goals are, they're not actions. Developing steps to achieve project goals requires setting project objectives. Objectives are specific, measurable steps that can be taken to achieve desired goals. Let's revisit our hypothetical example of a project whose goal is to document the presence and distribution of invasive plant species. 3 objectives to achieve that goal might be: 1. To map the parts of the refuge that harbor the highest densities of invasive plants at different times of year. 2. To determine which invasive plant species are most abundant in different parts of the refuge. And 3. To help volunteers understand the impact of invasive species on native flora and fauna. Sometimes objectives are stated as specific accomplishments. For example, an objective could be: have 50 volunteers visit all areas of the refuge to map the 5 most common invasive species in each location. However, some designers find this approach a bit too formulaic and not responsive to a project's evolving needs. The Flying Squirrel Project developed several objectives to determine the San Bernardino flying squirrel's distribution and habitat use. 1. Employ tracking cameras to collect data to determine the squirrel's distribution and habitat use in the San Bernardino and San Jacinto Mountains. 2. Recruit and engage volunteers in setting out cameras on their properties to ensure data collection across a wide area, particularly on private property. 3. Have volunteers send photos from the cameras to the San Diego Natural History Museum for review and storage, and post photos on a project website to allow tracking of flying squirrel locations. 4. Analyze the data to determine flying squirrel populations. And 5. Build trusting relationships and shared understandings with the local community. The Saguaro Census developed 4 objectives to study the long-term health and vitality of saguaro cactus. 1. Detect changes in cactus distribution that may be related to climate or other landscape-level processes. 2. Study saguaros on randomly distributed study plots across a wide elevation gradient. 3. Train volunteers to collect data, to search for, measure, and flag all saguaros encountered along belt transects within each plot. And 4. Analyze data and make them available on the park's website. Organizers of Colorado Bat Watch acted on 4 objectives to achieve the goal of providing reliable data to meet statewide bat monitoring needs. 1. Collect baseline data on site locations and characteristics, with emphasis on roost sites and anthropogenic structures. 2. Make data on bat roost sites available to agency partners. 3. Engage volunteers in monitoring at bat roost sites. And 4. generate media around the project, and hold trainings and educational events to recruit the public to participate and to teach the public about the value of bats and their conservation. As you can see, all objectives for all three projects are specific and measurable steps to be taken in service to the project's stated goal. With goals and objectives generated and defined, project developers can begin to work through the steps of engaging partners, recruiting participants, and designing protocols, data collection mechanisms, and instructional supports to fully engage participants in collecting accurate and meaningful data. But first, to aid in project design and development, some projects develop a project model. A project model is a visual depiction of how a project is intended to work. Project models link goals and objectives to the project inputs, which are the resources available to develop the project, and to the activities that will be required to achieve the project objectives. They also show desired project outputs and outcomes. In addition to informing project design, project models can help with project evaluation, a subject we will return to in Module 10. Meanwhile, to describe project models, we need to define the terms inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. Inputs are the resources that are made available to the project. They include funding sources, staff time, volunteer interest, and project and technological infrastructure. Activities refer to things that a project will develop, conduct, or make available to meet project objectives. They can be broken down into activities conducted by project staff and activities completed by project participants. Staff activities could include developing project protocols, providing training workshops, creating educational materials, or recruiting partner organizations. Participant activities might include attending trainings or events, visiting a website, collecting and submitting data, and communicating with other participants. Ideally, all planned activities should be defined during project development. Note that blurring can occur between objectives and activities, and you can spend hours reading about the differences between them with little enlightenment. Don't get too hung up on this. Outputs are the direct products or services of the activities and typically are easy to quantify. Examples include the number of training workshops that staff deliver, the number of web pages that a project develops, the number of people who participate in a project, and the amount of data that participants submit. Note that outputs are important to plan for and to measure, but in themselves do not constitute project success. Outcomes are things that happen as a result of activities and outputs. Scientific outcomes can be publications, management or policy decisions, or data products, which could include metadata, visualization, specimens, and data requests. For example, a scientific outcome could be a new understanding of the speed and depth of the spread of invasive species across a refuge. Audience outcomes could be changes in knowledge or understanding of a concept or idea resulting from project participation or experience. Audience outcomes also can include changes in scientific engagement, scientific skills, and attitudes or behaviors regarding science. Outcomes are harder to measure than outputs, but are critical to a project's success. All of these items, inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes, are in service to project goals and objectives and should be included in a project model. Models should be created early in project development and should then guide project design and deployment. Project models should not be static tools, however. As projects evolve to reflect changes in underlying assumptions and theory, models should be updated to reflect this thinking. Some projects create a poster of their project model, and then as the work progresses, use sticky notes to update and check off tasks within the model. Or they create an online tool that all team members can access, discuss, and modify. For example, organizers of the Saguaro census use Gantt charts in Excel to organize the project. This involves brainstorming, reviewing the goals and objectives, then establishing tasks and timelines, and the person responsible in the spreadsheet. The Gantt chart becomes the agenda for each planning meeting. Eventually, it becomes highly detailed as team members plan how they will accomplish the work on each plot by designating a group or groups, date or dates, and so forth. They can track the progress of the entire project and adjust as they go along to make sure they accomplish the work in the time frame available. On the screen is a simplified project model of our hypothetical invasive plant project. As you can see, this project has a definite goal to document the presence and distribution of invasive plant species. It also has objectives to meet the goal, with inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes developed to support those objectives. Some things to keep in mind when developing a project model. First, your objectives must be extremely clear. If your objectives are vague, designing activities to achieve them will be challenging. Second, activities must be well aligned to the objectives and are likely to miss a target that is fuzzy or moving. Third, any activity must provide full support to participants to achieve desired outcomes. Determining goals and objectives and developing a program model that describes project activities can be a collaborative and bonding exercise among team members and partners, leading to a unified project vision, including shared understanding of project goals, agreement on targeted project outcomes, and expectations about when those outcomes will occur. Outputs and outcomes are discussed in greater detail in Module 10. Meanwhile, let's look at how our example projects have fared after developing clear goals and objectives. The Flying Squirrel project developed two parallel studies that collected the same types of data. The first study, led by the San Diego Natural History Museum, involved citizen science on private lands. To engage residents across the San Bernardino region in putting out motion sensor cameras to capture photos of the squirrels, museum staff put up wanted posters saying, "Call this number," and worked with local news outlets to have articles published in the local papers. From this effort, they enlisted numerous volunteers to collect and submit data across the entire range of the squirrels. The second study was carried out by college interns at the University of California, San Diego, who worked on U.S. Forest Service land. By combining data from both studies into a single data set, sufficient information was generated to determine that the squirrels were not endangered. Project results were published in the journal Western North American Naturalist. Saguaro census data are used to develop research grants and to share with other scientists, for example, at gatherings such as the 2023 Saguaro Research Symposium. In addition, the accumulation of data over a long time scale allows ecosystem-wide understanding that can have implications from policy decisions to educational endeavors. For example, the results of the 2020 census confirm the patterns that emerged from the 2010 census. The large number of relatively young saguaros just beginning to reach reproductive age is a positive sign and reflects the survival of many saguaros that germinated throughout the park from roughly 1970 to 1990. This trend is offset, though, by a smaller establishment of saguaros since the 1990s, which appears to be strongly associated with drought that is probably driven by temperature extremes. Saguaro census data also are used on a daily basis for interpretive programs and to answer questions from the media, from local to international, about how the saguaros are doing and how they are responding to climate change. An informative article about the saguaro census was published in the journal Park Science. Phase 1 of Colorado Bat Watch was launched on International Bat Appreciation Day, April 17, 2023. Since then, nearly 50 observations have been submitted to the project's database, providing information on the location and characteristics of bat roost sites throughout Colorado. Phase 2 of Colorado Bat Watch will involve conducting emergence counts, that is, counts of the number of bats emerging from a roost in the evening at select roost sites. Project staff also have begun placing lock boxes where community members can check out bat monitoring kits, which include a bat detection device that allows volunteers to identify possible bat species and other materials needed to monitor bats. In addition, project staff have held several educational events to engage the public in bat conservation. These have included bat walks and talks with experts from Bat Conservation International, during which participants can learn about the ecology of bats, where they live, what they do, and why they are important. Equally important, as protocols were field tested and data collection began, BatWatch staff realized that the project needed additional objectives. They added 5, which are 1. To increase the number of citizen scientists engaged, emphasizing underrepresented communities, ranchers, and farmers. 2. To increase the number of roost sites identified and the geographic distribution of colonies monitored. 3. To identify roost sites suitable for white nose syndrome vaccine testing. 4. To refine protocols and ensure consistency with the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And 5. To assess the feasibility of engaging volunteers in acoustic surveys. These new objectives emphasize the need for a project to be flexible and to change over time as a project comes to life or as it encounters real-world conditions. The new objectives also are emblematic of the changing and adaptive nature of good citizen science. Thank you for joining me today. The goal of this presentation has been to guide you in setting obtainable goals and measurable objectives for your project. We hope that you'll take away 3 key ideas. First, that goals serve as guiding stars for your project. Second, that objectives are actions taken to achieve your goals. And third, that project models help you conceive, plan, and carry out a successful project. Module 4 discusses developing a project team to design and implement your project. It also discusses identifying your audience, that is, the individuals or groups that will participate. The accompanying Citizen Science Toolkit includes resources to further guide your project design efforts. Have a great day.